Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast, where we discuss Stoicism, the ancient philosophy of living the good life. I'm your host, Bryce, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Benny and Brendan. We are here to help you apply Stoic wisdom to your everyday life, no matter what the obstacle you may be facing, whether it be work stress, relationship issues, or just the general ups and downs of life. Stoicism has something to offer us all.
Hello. Welcome to the Via Stoica podcast. I am your host, Brendan. I'm joined here by my good friend, Benny. Benny, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Brendan. How are you?
Good. Today we've got another great interview for you guys. It's the co-authors of the book Stoic Ethics, The Basics, Brittany Polat and Gill. Brittany Polat holds a PhD in Applied Linguistics, but is currently devoted to the study and practice of Stoicism. As a philosophical writer, speaker, and community organizer, she specializes in conveying complex philosophical ideas in a form that is accessible to a wide and diverse audience. And then Christopher Gill is an Emeritus professor at the Ancient Thought at the University of Exeter in the UK. Following earlier appointments at Yale, Bristol, and Aberystwyth Universities, he has published many books and articles in ancient philosophy, especially Stoicism. Welcome to the program, guys. It's great to have you here.
Great.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
And we wanted to get the interview started off. This book, but first, before we get into that, I do kind of want to understand your backgrounds a little bit more. Brittany, how did you find your way to Stoicism? What is kind of your journey that brings you here?
Well, it was basically a shipwreck moment in my life. Stoicism was founded on a shipwreck when Zeno had lost his precious cargo, and then turned to philosophy. So I like to think of my path in kind of a similar way. I was at a point in my life where I needed some direction. I was experiencing a big, career change. I had 3 young children who I didn't really know how to give the proper guidance in life. It's one thing when you're responsible for yourself. It's another when you're responsible for 3 little lives and making sure that, they get on the right path and offering them the best that life has to offer, not materially, but, spiritually, intellectually, this kind of thing. So at that moment, I started looking around, and one day I went on Amazon and I typed in wisdom in the search box. And interestingly, a book came up called A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy by William Irvin. And I know it's quite popular among practicing Stoics. I highly recommend it if you're, for some reason, not familiar with it. But Bill Irvin goes through, why would anyone want to be a Stoic? This weird sounding name, this weird philosophy. And I was hooked, and I started reading more. I read the original sources. I read as much as I could by people like Gill, who it's an honor to be here with today, and John Sellers, Donald Robertson, Massimo Pigliucci, all of the people who have written these wonderful modern Stoic books, and just got more and more into it and started writing about it, started connecting with Modern Stoicism, the organization, doing podcasts, conferences, and later on I co-founded with my friend Eve Riches, a nonprofit called Stoicare, where we try to share Stoicism more as a philosophy of well-being and care, kind of counteracting all of those horrible YouTube videos that you see where it's the guys with the bulging muscles and the manosphere content and all of this. So we want to show the pro-social nature of Stoicism, which of course Chris and I do in our book as well. And I should mention, thank you for the wonderful introduction, Brendan, for introducing me. But this book is primarily the work of Chris. He wrote about 80% of it at least. So I just want to make sure that's recognized, that it's primarily based on his lifetime of work. And he very kindly invited me to help contribute and put it in an accessible format.
Oh, that's wonderful. We love to hear that. But Chris, we'll pass it over to you. I'd love to hear your journey and how you kind of found your way to Stoicism.
Yeah, just on the book, I mean, it's good of Brittany to say that, but I feel it was, I wrote most of the words, but it was very important to me that we were collaborating in that way, and that the book has 2 voices and 2 points of view. Mine, the more academic, if you like, and yours, the more practical. And it's your voice too. and it's a woman's voice too. I think these things are very important. And I realized that you would be an ideal interlocutor because you did in your Substack, your series, a wonderful series of commentaries on an earlier academic book I had done on Stoic ethics, in which you explained what I had been trying to explain much more clearly, much more engagingly. And I realized that here was someone who could really help me and help us together to work to get the book across. So I don't think, when we're measuring collaboration, it isn't just the number of words that matters. It's also the way things come together, the relationship and so on. Well, I'm kind of different from most people in modern Stoicism because I've been kind of researching on Stoicism and other ancient philosophies forever, really. I mean, it's a very long time. I mean, I think interestingly, I studied ancient philosophy, researched, wrote about for decades. And my involvement then was my involvement in modern Stoicism, in Stoicism as an applied phenomenon. And that came to me very late, actually, on the verge of retirement, when I became aware of it and got involved in it. And when I set up with some other people, an organization called Modern Stoicism, which was bringing together academics and practitioners to present Stoicism for a broad audience. And since then, I've also been involved in the Aurelius Foundation. So my journey is a rather different one. I think in a way it was prepared for in my career, in that for years and years and years, I did a course on Greek and Roman ethics for third-year students, about 20 students, quite a specialist group. And more, and I studied Aristotle, Epicurus, and Stoicism. And more, it seemed to me that Stoicism was the one that was the most enriching and the philosophy and ethical philosophy, and the one was going to be most helpful to people. So I was sort of moving in a Stoic direction. But my involvement in modern Stoicism came with, at the same time as retirement from full-time teaching. And so in a way, it kind of filled a gap because I wasn't teaching undergraduates, but I was communicating with, not teaching, but adults who are interested in this kind of thing and collaborating with, not my department colleagues, but with other people working in modern Stoicism. So it really was a kind of second career in that sense, not a second project. In terms of my personal life, it did coincide with, sadly, the death of my wife and the mother of my 4 sons. And so that was also a factor, I think, because I did ask myself, what's the point of studying all these wonderful philosophies that are supposed to help you through life if they don't? If Stoicism, if it doesn't mean anything, it doesn't mean nothing. What is the value? So I think it did make me ask some very hard questions about that. And Stoicism especially does dwell on dealing with death. So that was a factor. Yeah. So quite a lot of things came together in that. I should say just that my 4 sons, some of them have been helpful along the way. They've in all sorts of ways actually in this journey in modern Stoicism. Sorry, I've gone on for a bit.
Oh, that's great. And thanks for sharing that. And it seems like whenever we speak to people and we ask them, how did your journey start? It usually starts with these obstacles. It never starts with someone, I was at the top of the world, I was celebrating. And then, there's always these personal things that happen and that people seek things to better or some help or support. And, we experience Stoicism the same way. So thank you for sharing that story. And I agree, Chris, when you mentioned the collaboration in the book. It's really interesting to read, your text and Brittany's view on it. And there's some wonderful analogies. For example, one of them where you talk about, where the 2 philosophers talk about whether it's ethical if you sell, the corn without, providing them all the information, or whether you can do that. And then Brittany's analogy with the car, selling the car to a person or selling it to a used car sales lot. How much information do you need to, when isn't it ethical? So I really like those analogies. And bringing it to that practical view. So I really thank you both for that. I really am enjoying it, and I need Brittany's view to explain some of it, and then I go back to your view, Chris, and it's really quite interesting. But what made you decide to write about, as you mentioned, you've written about ethics, right? But what made you decide that this book was needed right now? You want a book on Stoic ethics and the basics?
Sure. I think there's two. Okay, it seemed to me there was a gap, or rather two gaps. First of all, having taught undergraduates for years and years, they often would come to me and say, hang on, have you got something a bit more basic on Stoic ethics, something a bit more straightforward? Because I would be recommending them to these, high-flown academic works, and they were kind of baffled by them to a large extent. So one of the things I wanted to do was actually, for students, the kind of people I taught for all those years, something a bit clearer, something that would philosophy students or classic students. And then there's another gap, I think, I was pretty keen to fill. There are lots and lots, as Brittany has mentioned, lots and lots of wonderful books on modern Stoicism by Irvine and Robertson and many others. What there isn't is a book which, or wasn't until we wrote this, was a book that kind of takes you to the next level. Supposing you read some of these books, and you read Epictetus and Marcus, and you think, well, this is fine, but I want to know a bit more about the ideas. I want to know a bit more about the theory. I want to have a more systematic understanding, and to have the kind of understanding that the ancient Stoics themselves had of this topic. And that's, so it's bringing that up and that next level up, not going into, too much heavy duty detail, but just taking things a bit further. So that was a big part of the motivation for me.
Yeah, I like that. Especially when I read the Cambridge Guide to the Stoics, that was for me a little bit too much. But then where you also contributed a wonderful piece. But then that's why I like that collaboration. And Brittany, what was the reason behind, for you to collaborate and to also have this feeling like this book needs to be out there here right now?
Yeah. Well, obviously there was a gap in the market. There's a lot of books look at Stoicism comprehensively, whereas we wanted to focus more on ethics, which of course for many people is the more practical part. It's what they're going to be actually implementing in their lives. And I also saw a need for an authoritative version of Stoic ethics with so much out there about Stoicism that we see as, misperceptions of Stoicism or even a corruption of Stoicism. People saying that Stoicism can help you get rich or, build muscles or these kinds of things. And so I wanted to contribute to an authoritative version that has the academic heft of Chris's work behind it, but that also we can just hand to someone. It's only about 150 pages, and we can say, here you go, read this. It won't take you too long. It's pretty easy to understand. And so this is what Stoicism in its more sincere form is about. So that was another one of my goals.
Could I mention one other thing when we're talking about overall aims?
Yeah, of course.
Another thing I wanted to do was to widen the range of sources that people refer to for Stoic ethics. There's a tendency, especially among modern Stoics, they read Epictetus, Marcus, maybe some Seneca. That's kind of it, really. But academics, when they're talking about Stoic ethics, they don't really look at those works at all. They look at three summaries of ancient summaries of Stoic ethics, which are quite technical, but they are the kind of core information. And they also look at several important Cicero works, Cicero on ends, Cicero on duties, and some other Cicero works. So I really wanted to widen the range of sources, because otherwise there's a real disconnect between modern Stoicism and scholarly Stoicism, the Stoicism that goes on in universities, and people are just talking past each other. So that was one thing I wanted to do, and to bring out that some of the more, as it were, academic sources, especially Cicero's, they're very accessible. And they really, Cicero's on duties is it is, at one point I say, it's like Stoic ethics, the basics. It's a really helpful work, but people don't don't read it so much as they do Epictetus. And I tell you, it gives a much more practical, feet on the ground kind of version of Stoic decision making than Epictetus does. So and really valuable. So I think widening the range of ancient sources was a big part of it for me.
Oh, that's an excellent point. And perfect for me, personally, because I've actually been kind of, very much like, okay, I've read the big three and I've read a lot of them, but I'm looking to kind of grow outside of that. So this is well timed for me personally. But when you were writing this book, was this something that you were writing for, I guess, more, let's say, seasoned Stoics, or would it be something that a novice or a beginner would pick up and still get some value from?
Well, we kind of worked quite hard. We worked quite a bit on this, didn't we, Brittany? Because we had to have several goes at it. And then we showed it to people and they said, well, this doesn't quite work, hang on, So I think we were trying to work our way with this. Well, the short answer is all. We want to reach anyone, but I think I had in mind a kind of typical first or second year university student, who may, have come across ethics in some form or another, but nothing too technical. And on the other hand, a kind of modern Stoic, the kind of people I meet at conferences, Stoic events, who, as I said, had a bit of experience. They've done some Epictetus and Marcus, but they'd like a bit more. I don't mean just more of the same. They want something a bit deeper. So those are the two kinds I had especially in mind. But as Plato said, when you write a book, it rolls around all over the place and all sorts of people pick it up and you don't know who it's going to go to. But we hope it will speak widely.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add, I second that. And we did have a very broad audience in mind. Once we started working with Routledge, we knew that it was going to be definitely for students. And from the beginning, we also wanted it to be for practicing Stoics. So we wrote it specifically with those two audiences in mind, which I think is kind of unique. I think most books are either written for a general audience or for an academic audience, or maybe as a textbook. And we kind of wrote it as all three at the same time. So it was an interesting challenge to make sure that we provided information that would speak to each of those audiences. For example, when I came up with some of my, modern day applications, it had to be relevant to a first-year university student, to an 18-year-old. So it was kind of a challenge to come up with things that would be relevant to, someone in the middle of their life, but also to someone just starting out on their life. So it was definitely a fun challenge.
I think you, from my experience, I think you really handled that well, because it reads as an academic text for someone who wants to delve in deeper. And I like the new sources, with Plato, Aristotle, but also the books on Cicero. I haven't read On Duties completely, but you definitely inspired me to go and, pick them up. I've put them on my list to read, because as you mentioned, and the examples that you mentioned there as well, that they are quite accessible and give a really good view on ethics. I have some questions about that later, but also the practitioner view, because there's so many, as you pointed out, Brittany, there's so many different views on Stoicism. If you go on YouTube, but also if you go on certain Facebook groups or groups online, there's so many clashes on, this is what Stoicism is, and this is, so I like the fact that you've written a book that is out there, that brings some authoritative general view of like, this is, let's look at the sources, let's look at what it is and give us a view of ethics. So how would you, you describe it in the books, but how would you view the importance of ethics in our lives at the moment? What is the connection, the book that you wanted to bring to, maybe to add something to, the modern world in general?
Brittany, would you like to make a start on that?
Wow, that's quite a big question. Well, yeah. So I think, as is widely acknowledged, we're at kind of a transitional point in Western culture, perhaps, where the traditional sources of authority, religion, the typical community and family structures that have pretty much guided us for hundreds of years are changing. So it's a time of great social, economic, political change. So I think a lot of people are looking for new sources of ethics. ethics is one of those things, it can't go away. It is a part of being human, relating to each other. We're a hyper-social species. We have to live with each other, and we have to somehow get along with each other. So ethics is always going to be a concern, whether people write books and call it ethics, or whether it's just something that grows up organically in a community. Ethics is always there. So I think it's important for us as Stoics, as people who reflect philosophically on these issues, to put something out there and try to reach people in a way that's, it's not ivory tower. It's not, snobby, or it's not saying, well, only some people can do philosophy the right way, right? There are some philosophies out there that give that impression. So I think for both Chris and myself, we see Stoic ethics as very egalitarian, as very helpful for people in all walks of life. So that would be my view on why it's important to get a book on Stoic ethics out there, and the importance of ethics in general.
Yeah, I agree very much with that. I think we live in a kind of curious age, an age of great sophistication in some respects, and also of huge naivety. And when there's a massive gap in the middle that many people, they're taught how to make money and how to spend it, but they're not encouraged to think about much else, about what actually makes life worthwhile, about what is a good life, what is a life of happiness, what are the qualities we really want. Those questions are left, they shoved to one side, and that does mark a difference from a typical upbringing, I think, in certainly Britain and America up until Second World War and beyond, when churches and other kind of community life did pass on a lot of ethical messages. Often those messages were kind of narrow and restrictive, but at least they were messages. So I think there's a big gap, there's a big thing there. But of course, Stoicism is reflective. It's not just saying, oh, here's the answer. It's asking you, what is the question? It's posing the question. What is a good human life? What is virtue? How should we decide? So it's both. It's giving us content, but it's not just giving life on a plate. It's giving us the resources to think for ourselves, and that's, I think, one of the things we're trying to do. The big question, but also, we're not giving the big answer, not necessarily. It's the means of addressing questions. That's what matters.
Oh, that's great. No, that's well said. And we've talked about that here on the Via Stoica podcast here a few times, about this idea that kind of the normal institutions that people have depended on are kind of starting to fall apart, or at least the trust in those organizations is starting to erode away a bit. And that we've always viewed kind of philosophy in general, but Stoicism specifically, as a good internal guiding philosophy or guiding light to kind of help you navigate the world and things like that. But what is it? Is there anything specific? I guess, Chris, you just touched on it a little bit, but anything specific about Stoic ethics that, Brittany, that you decided, hey, this is the thing I want to champion. This is the thing I want to give to as many people as possible. What was it about Stoicism or Stoic ethics in particular that drew you to it?
Yeah, the feature that was always picked on in antiquity, and that's still very important, is their idea that virtue is the fundamental basis of happiness. Sometimes it's almost that virtue is happiness, but it isn't. But that's slight simplification. But virtue is fundamental. Virtue is fundamental to actions, relationships, to emotions. So that's something that the Stoics, stress more than any other ancient philosophy. And that, of course, that now fits in with the development of modern virtue ethics, which is, an important form of modern philosophy. But it's also something that people can grasp. Now, you've got to kind of mediate this a bit, because sometimes you say virtue, and people think, well, what is it? What's this virtue business? Or they don't like the sound of it. It sounds as though it's, I know the answer to everything and you don't know the answer to anything. So you've got to explain virtue is the virtues are those qualities which we value above everything else. And they're the qualities that make a human life worth living. I mean, those are the things. And these are something we can all respond to and all have some sense of and all actually operate with. Even, even the most hardened criminals have a conception of the virtues, what's really makes life worth living. So I think that is the key thing. And I think it's useful, I think, not just to talk about virtue, but to talk about the virtues, because the Stoics talk in terms of four core virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance or self-control, temperance or moderation. Now, these aren't just like four virtues that you plug out of your back pocket. These are the virtues that map all the different spheres of a human life. So wisdom is our understanding, justice is our relationship with other people, moderation relates especially to emotions, and a courage to situations involving fear. So these are kind of, and the Stoics thought there were lots of sub-virtues. So it's not that these virtues matter and the others don't. It's that these give you a framework. And I think the stress on the idea of virtues is partly this. I think for the Stoics, the virtues are forms of understanding. They're forms of character, yes, and they shape emotions, but they're also forms of understanding. And what the Stoics want to say above all is that if you have moral understanding, you can cope with any situation. So that's when they say that virtue is the sole basis for happiness. That's what they're saying, is that if you have the virtues, to the extent that you have the virtues, that you can cope with any situation. And this underlies one of their famous images, the idea that the wise person, the virtuous person, is happy on the rack of torture. Now, this is one of these easy to misunderstand ideas. And people think, oh, well, the Stoics is only happy when he's on the rack of torture. Well, no, that's not the point. The point is, and let's go out and find a rack. Now, the point is that if you have moral understanding, then whatever situation you find yourself, however difficult, however problematic, however wealthy you are, supposing you're massively wealthy, your dad is a big tech giant, you can cope with that if you have the virtues, if you have moral understanding. But it's not easy to get. It's something you have to work towards. This, I think, is something that people often don't get. The virtues, we don't kind of, oh dear, oh yeah, it's Wednesday, I'll just get the virtues. Well, no, it's a lifelong quest. But it's a quest we can all undertake. And that's a very important thing about the Stoics. They think that all human people have the starting points of understanding. We all have the starting points of virtue. To be human is to have the basis for learning about virtue. And that's another very, very important message that they have. And again, it's slightly different from Plato and Aristotle, who tend to think there's kind of moral elite in the world. But no, the Stoics will say everyone, even those appalling people. Well, I won't give a list, but anyway, the most appalling people, to be human is to have the starting point of virtue. So I think those are two really very key, important ideas: the centrality of virtue and the availability of ethical understanding and ethical education.
No, that's well said. I really love that. I love this idea too. What you mentioned is this. If you have the moral understanding, then you have the ability to kind of cope with anything. I really like that. Brittany, is there anything you want to add to that about why Stoic ethics are so important to you?
Well, I mean, I think Chris said most everything, but I would just add from a practitioner's point of view, and another reason we wanted to write the book is because Stoic ethics does speak to everyone. So I think, one reason it's so popular is that it's addressed to anyone, no matter what you've done in your past life, no matter how poor you are or how rich you are. no matter what, it speaks to everyone. In contrast to a lot of other ancient philosophies, such as, Aristotelians say, well, you have to have a certain amount of worldly goods in order to be happy, or if all your children are killed, you obviously can't be happy. So you're kind of just out of luck. And I think Aristotelians also stress good moral education in childhood. They have a lot to say about, raising good children, which of course is important. But for people who did not receive that type of moral education, well, I guess you're out of luck for your whole life. You're doomed, So what Stoicism does is it offers the resources to all of us as adults who want to make changes, who want to improve. And Stoicism tells us you can improve. If you want to, you will make progress. And this is a very hopeful and inspiring message. It's empowering. It really, it puts the power back in your own hands. It doesn't matter what your society is doing. It doesn't matter what kind of family you come from. It doesn't matter what your past is like. You have the power right now to change yourself, to improve your character, and from this day forward, to make different choices. And I think there are very few philosophies that have the coherence that Stoicism does, the intellectual foundations that Stoicism does, and that offer that empowerment and that sense of the ability to move forward in your life. Stoicism is very unique in that way. And so I think that's why it has such widespread appeal. And we want to contribute to that in a very, meaningful way and make sure people understand what Stoicism really is all about.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. And that reminds me of the analogy that you use in the book with the acorn, right? Like every acorn has the possibility to grow in this really big oak tree, but we have these things that come across our life, and we all have the possibility to, maybe become that wise person, although that's going to be a very difficult feat, but at least we can try. And is that the question that came up to me as also an educator, and as schools, not on the university level, but there's the question between nurture and nature, right? And that's also something that comes up. Is it correct to see that the Stoics would say that we all have it in our nature to be virtuous, but then our nurture throughout life could be that obstacle, and that's up to us? I don't know. How do you see that?
Well, it's a bit, they do, yeah, they might appear to be denying the significance of nurture. They might appear to be saying, oh, well, social circumstances don't matter, but that isn't the case. They do recognize they are aware of what they call the sources of corruption. And that's sort of not so well known, but it is part of their theory. And they do know. And in fact, they think this is very deep-rooted. They think it's actually part of human life, that it's just very natural for us to go wrong. So it's natural for us to think that, for instance, that pleasure and money and status are the most important things in life. That's very, very natural. That's very common. And it's also natural for us to be misled by the people around us, by our parents, our teachers, the media. So they know all this. But what they're saying is, even so, just to be human is to have the ethical and rational resources so that if you really work at it, you can counteract these things and come to a better understanding. And, some people say, well, no, you can't. No, some people have just had it. But I think the Stoics have the better of the argument. I think if you look at the whole of human history and think of the amazing stories and people who come out of the most dreadful situations, out of Auschwitz and terrible situations, and they've come through. And there are, that if you look around the world, there are terrible things happening all the time around the world. But there are also amazing stories of courage and kindness and justice. So I think the Stoics really have the better of the argument on this. But it's just opening our minds to this positive message that they have to give. So I think so they are aware of this, but they do think we all have this capacity. But it takes work. It's not easy, and but it's good work. It's enjoyable work, because after all, what could matter more, really? What could matter more than leading a good life, becoming a decent human being? What what are these important other things that have to make you defer it?
And I think that's something that really scares people away from something like this, where you say, oh, the virtues is impossible because it seems like it's a lot of work, which it is. And nowadays people just want to have these quick fixes, right? As Brittany said, you have these videos and it's like, oh, do this and you're going to be happy. Do this and you're going to be rich. But to do the real work that matters, I think that the quotes as well, by saying like, we care a lot about work, but we don't take care of our soul or character. And that's really what, the Stoicism is about, really, to mind our character, because that's what it's about. And as you said, Brittany, your journey started when you became a mom. You have your 3 kids. How do you view this topic of nurture versus nature, and your role in that when you raise your children and you started on this Stoic journey?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question, nature versus nurture. And there's a lot of discussion, both from a scientific perspective. The psychologists do studies, especially twin studies, of if you raise genetically identical people in the same environment versus different environment. So there is a lot that has been written about this. But just from my own personal point of view, as a mother to 3 kids, they are born with their own personalities. And I don't think as a parent we should try. I don't think we can change their innate personality that much. And I don't think we should. I think we should appreciate and celebrate each child's, whether they're shy, whether they're outgoing, whatever kind of gifts they bring to the world. I think we should nurture those and help them find the right way to apply those. I see personality as kind of like an indifferent. It doesn't matter what you have, but it matters what you do with it. So if you're an outgoing person and you use that to be a bully, that's a bad use of your extroversion. If you're an outgoing person and you use it to help other people, that's a good use of your outgoingness. So to me, personality traits that are just inborn are kind of like that. I will say, as a parent, I feel that I can make my most important contribution in my kids' emotional patterns and their character. So personally, I differentiate between personality and character. I think in a lot of psychology research, the two are conflated. People consider, moral personality rather than distinguishing a character that we have it power to change. So for me, your character is up to you. It's kind of like what Epictetus was talking about, your moral choice. Whereas whether you happen to be born, with a talent for music or a talent for athletics or whatever it is, that's not really up to you. It's what you do with it that matters. And it's the choices you make and the character that you form for yourself. So as a parent, I have some ability to influence my children, the way I show them how to react to things. So if they spill their milk and I get upset and angry, then they learn to get upset about small things that happen in life. But if they spill their milk and I'm very calm and I just help them to clean it up, then they learn how to handle situations in a much more stoic way. So, there are, to me, since I've been practicing Stoicism for about 8 years now, I don't think it's something, you can't just have unlimited influence over your kids, but you can influence them in certain key important ways, such as emotional patterns and character.
Yeah, I would agree with that a lot. I've had 4 sons and I've got 5 grandchildren. I think kids take much more notice of what you do than what you say, because that they draw the inference. They draw inferences. So I think that's absolutely right. I think the other thing I would say about upbringing is the importance of giving people space, of giving people room to breathe, to not kind of micromanaging, which I'm sure you don't, Brittany. But I think that's a very important dimension that isn't always understood. And of course, it doesn't mean a lack of care. It doesn't mean lack of care. It's rather, that is care. That is proper care. Is when you allow other people allow that they are as independent as you are and as you want to be. And that's, I think, something that the Stoic texts do stress themselves in different ways. The importance of recognizing that each of us have autonomy, independence, and that we should recognize it in others. I think that's another dimension, a very important dimension.
Oh,
I agree.
I was thinking one of the things that we wanted to bring out. I think one thing we wanted to bring out that isn't always stressed is, although you have mentioned it, Brittany, earlier, is the social dimension of Stoicism. Because Stoicism is very good at encouraging and enabling resilience, it's enabling us, enabling people to cope with difficult situations. There is a slight tendency then for people to think, oh, well, that's what Stoicism is about. It's about me. It's about enabling me to be resilient. I can deal with these situations. I can, especially it can often be a man thing. I can, whatever. I can deal with these situations. Well, yes, that's true. That is one of the things it teaches you. But it's also very much a philosophy of caring. Their ideas of development are centered in this idea of appropriation. The idea we have that ethical education consists of two kinds of caring. Care for ourselves, because that matters, care for ourselves, especially if it's properly conducted care for ourselves, and care for other people. They think the Stoics, unusually actually, think that caring for others is just as basic an instinct, a human instinct, indeed an animal instinct, as care for yourself. And that then goes right through every aspect of Stoicism. They're thinking about virtue, they're thinking about community, they're thinking about ethical education, they're thinking about emotions, are permeated by their view that as a human being, we are part of communities, part of families, part of communities, part of the community of humankind. So I think that we really wanted to bring that across, and I think it is an important message, and one that is often missed in modern Stoicism.
That is one aspect of Stoicism that I love so much, is this sort of community aspect of it, and how it talks about that we are kind of part of a whole. But if for some reason it does seem to get left out so often in sort of the more, let's say, simple explanations or simple definitions of it. Do you guys have any idea or maybe theory as to why that is, why the community aspect of Stoicism is kind of overlooked so easily?
Well, I think this is especially an American thing, to be honest, because partly because Stoicism has been taken over very much by the military and with military training. No, actually, of course, military training is all about team training, in fact. But there can be a stress on, a kind of macho dimension or a success dimension. There's what you might call Silicon Valley Stoicism, which, again, that's more about me. Why do I think it gets missed out? Well, I think one factor is that a very influential source for modern Stoicism for many people is Epictetus. And Epictetus is wonderful. He's a very rich, interesting source for Stoic ethics, but he does very much stress qualities like resilience and it's not that he also stresses community, but he doesn't stress it as much as some of the other writers and some of the other thinkers. And I think that's a factor. I don't know that there's a single explanation, but I think it's something. What I'm very sure about in Brittany, and I agree very much. It's we need to be very clear about the importance of the social dimension, and not just the community of humankind. I mean, the Stoics do believe in the community of humankind, but they also believe in family, neighborhoods, working with other people. That's very important. You read On Duties, it's all about the kind of thick stuff and web of social life as the context of our decision making. So we need to bring that back or in, I think. Make sure that doesn't get lost sight of.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is maybe part of the context in which the Stoic writings were created, and some of them, obviously, Epictetus wasn't writing, he was talking, he was teaching students. Yeah, I think in ancient Greek and Roman culture, the family was so strong, it was kind of like obvious. It went without saying, I think, in some ways. So it was just kind of something that everybody knew, like, okay, we don't even have to mention this because we already know everyone loves their families and they're going to participate in their family life. So it's kind of like a fish out of water type thing, right? They just took it for granted. Whereas society has shifted, where we are today, a lot of people don't take that for granted, and they need to be told that specifically. So Chris knows a lot more about this than I do, but that's occurred to me in the past that could be one explanation, is that it was simply assumed that, everyone is doing this. We don't need to spend that much time talking about it. Whereas today, people feel that we do need to spend more time talking about it.
And it's interesting as well, as we mentioned at the beginning, the kind of dissipation of religion and of church. That used to be a big drive for community. You used to go there together. Like I was raised Christian. We used to go to church every Sunday. You meet your people there. It's really bonding, right? And you can see now, as we move more towards an online world where even we're meeting, which is a wonderful positive side of this. We're able to meet and speak about this from all different parts of the world, but a lot of people feel alienated. And then if you get the wrong messages of Stoicism out there saying you can do this by yourself, you can, whatever, without really doing the hard work, then people will gear towards that feeling. So I can do this by myself. I don't need anyone else. And that is the message that can be dangerous, that is put out there. And as you both mentioned, Stoicism is really, even Epictetus was teaching the people coming together, and he mentions in some of the discourses where he goes against Epicurus, right, where it is this social philosophy. So I think that's why it's really wonderful that you're adding those two cares as well, the self-care, but also the care for others. I think that's a really big emphasis to provide there. And you mentioned that appropriation, right? That could you explain that a little bit more of what you mean with that? And because that comes back in throughout the entire book and seems like a very important concept. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So the key Stoic idea about ethical education is that it is natural for us. Okay. So developing an understanding of virtue, developing socially, that's part of human nature. That's part of human nature is both rational and also sociable. It's those two elements. So, and appropriation is their most complex account of that. Now, appropriation, it's maybe not the most helpful of words, because you think of you're kind of appropriating something. You're kind of taking it over. You can use other words. It's the Greek word is oikosis, and that's making something your own. Okay, it's making something your own. You're making yourself your own. You're making other people your own. Not that you're taking them over, but that you're relating to them. You're also making the world your own. We need to talk about the world, I think, the larger natural world too in a minute. So they have their complex account. Cicero's on ends has a very full and interesting account of this, and there's also a lot about appropriation on duties. So ethical education is they break it down into these two dimensions: care for oneself, which leads to an understanding of the virtues and of where our happiness lies in life, and it leads to proper decision making, and social oikosis, which is about they think that a certain degree of care for others is natural to us. Animals look after their children, and people do have it naturally, but it needs to develop. As we develop morally, as we develop ethically, we need to inform the relationships we have with our understanding of virtue. So it's bringing these two things together: moral understanding and relating to other people. And that's basically what they mean by appropriation. Shall we? Sorry, I'm not meant to be asking questions, but shall we talk about nature a bit? Because I think that's a big question. And by nature, I mean the natural world. I think that's a very important. Because one of the things about Stoicism is they talk a lot about the life according to nature. The life according to nature means lots of different things, actually. But one of the things it means is that we live in relation to human nature, and we live in relation to the nature of the world we live in, the universe we live in. So a sense of human beings as part of nature is very fundamental to them. And this is, of course, incredibly important always, but it's especially important today partly because the organization of modern society has placed us at some remove from the natural world, most of us. And secondly, we're in the middle of a massive environmental crisis of global warming and climate change. And so, which is a human responsibility. It's a matter of human error and human selfishness that we've come to this point. So I don't think you can be a good Stoic today if you don't also apply your morality, your ethics, not only to the way you treat other people, not only to the way you treat yourself, but to the way you treat nature and the way you treat natural resources. So, and I think that the Stoic view of nature, they view nature as essentially something that's ordered, something that's coherent. And of course it is, except it isn't anymore because we've messed it up. So we've got to try and repair as far as we can, put the order back into nature, put the system and connection back into nature. So I think Stoicism can be, as well as a basis for ethics, as well as a basic for social relations, it can be a very important voice in the call for living a sustainable life. And this isn't just like, putting a modern spin on it. It's applying it to a modern situation that's very important. I don't know. Sorry, I've rather just sort of barged in there. Brittany,
it's great. No, I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you brought that up. I think it is a very important topic. One of the things that I think about, I'm also, outside of studying philosophy, and I'm involved in technology as well as for my career and things like that. So I think about a lot when it comes to, like, especially social media. I think that there wasn't a lot of ethics or philosophy involved in the development of that, which has led to a lot of the issues. I'm hoping as we kind of iterate into this sort of next version of technology, of the internet, that philosophy is more involved, that ethics are more considered. But what would you guys like to see as far as, ethics and how they're being, whether that's taught in schools or expanded on outside of this? Because, coming up in an American education, like, I never had an ethics course. That was something that did not happen for me. I had to go and learn that on my own or learn it from, family members, community members around me, that sort of thing. So what would you each like to see as far as, like, the next development in the ethics and how it's being taught?
I think ethics can be tricky in public education because then people start asking, whose ethics are you teaching, right? I mean, there's no one ethics. There's no widespread agreement on specific ethical principles sometimes. So I think that might be one reason why it's avoided in K through 12 education. But I think that can be circumvented by, kind of like Chris was saying earlier, it's about asking the questions. So if we frame it in terms of critical thinking, in terms of investigation, in terms of, we're teaching you how to explore the world and explore these ideas. We're not spoon feeding you, something that you need to regurgitate. And that's tricky anytime you have a large educational system, right? Because these days it's all about the standardized test. They want something that's very outcome-based, that you can easily measure and test. And ethics does not fit into that at all, especially when it's done well, when you're teaching it in a very exploratory way. So I think it therefore falls to families to teach a lot of this. I mean, I certainly do with my kids. I know a lot of people who are interested in Stoicism and philosophy teach kids. I think at the university level is an excellent time for it to be really, really explored and taught, because students are at that point where they have a little bit of life experience, so they've learned some things about society, about psychology, and they're really interested in asking questions. So I think maybe at the university level is where we could concentrate. So that's just some initial thoughts on some of the challenges that we face, practical challenges in the education system. Ideally, yes, we would be able to do it, but I recognize that there are some difficulties. So those are just some initial thoughts.
Oh, no, that's good. And Chris, what do you think?
Well, I think the same, really. I think, I think in modern Stoicism, we have at various times tried to develop. We run a Stoic Week course, which we've been running for many years. And Brittany has been involved in developing a version for children, really. But I don't know, it hasn't. I think it hasn't really taken off, and I think it's a tricky area. In theory, within British state education, there is a section called political and personal and social and health development, but and the teachers don't know what to do with it. It's just an embarrassment, and they suddenly realize, they should have been doing something about it. In a way, there's a gap there, and Stoicism could help fill it, and it is something we might work on. But in reality, I think you're right. It is the student age. It's 18 plus. That is the time when people are mostly ready for this kind of reflective understanding and questioning. And so much else is changing in their lives. Whether or not they go to university, there are big changes. So I think that is the age, and of course that's the kind of age that Epictetus was, as a teacher, was addressing. These are the kind of school kids that students that he had. So I think I would agree with that. And I think it's tricky because it's nothing can be more important. On the other hand, there are lots of things you have to avoid, and just kind of talking down to people is one, and being dogmatic is and unhelpful is another. But I think the secret is really raising the important questions, and everyone wants to raise these questions. What is human life for? What is happiness? What is virtue? Why are we here? What is the point? Is there any purpose in nature or not? These are the. And everyone has these questions, and they always will, as long as there are human beings. However complex, however concreted over our human life is, these questions persist, I think.
Yeah, and and I think, as you mentioned earlier as well, I think as an educator, it's also important, even at a young age, to set the right example. So maybe there should also be some training towards educators, how to set that right example, and for the young age, because that's what you mentioned in the book as well. And the Stoics, they say that after adulthood, which was an early age at that time, right around even in some things in the pre-teens, that they would still already be ready for that development, right? But as a teacher, we could have set that example and then later on move those questions, which is something that we were fortunate enough here to be asked those questions and to really critically think about the materials that we're studying, but not really about nature and all of these things. And so I think that's really a good job, especially if books like these were to be, implemented in a university level. As you said, the dual, purpose of the book, that would be a really good addition to it. And what would be well, you talked about nature, right? What would be the main questions that you would like to ask, that you would like to have these young adults ask themselves?
Well, I think there are these questions. What is our happiness in life depend on, and does it depend on virtue? What is the connection between gaining ethical understanding and relating properly to other people? What counts as right action, and how do we learn to make decisions? These are the important. What is the proper place of emotion in a good life? I'm just reading the back of the cover, but these are the Stoic questions. These are the fundamental Stoic questions. But there are also questions that anybody asks themselves if they think about things at all. And I think that again is one of our aims in writing the book, was to widen the range of questions that are linked with Stoicism. Stoicism is just about, I know there's a tendency in modern Stoicism just focusing on certain methods, certain the dichotomy of control and so on. I mean, it's fine, but Stoicism is also about questions. about very important, very fundamental questions. And these form the substance of Stoic ethical theory. They form the substance of much other ethical theory, and they form the substance of most people's lives when they're if they pause and take a look at themselves and have a thought. So I think these are the kinds of questions we want them to think about. Other questions.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Brittany, if you have some more, that would be great.
Yeah, I was just going to say, although this book, of course, focuses on ethics, I think another way that Stoicism in general can contribute to education of young people is through the logic, right? Yeah. Because we want people to question the messages that they receive from society. We want people to question that steady stream of messages from social media, so maybe question to start with would be, can you live without your phone? Is your life worth living without your phone, right? So these kinds of things, we don't want people to automatically believe a conspiracy theory that they read on the latest, social media post, right? We want people to be able to establish what is objectively true in this situation. So I think, obviously ethics does come into that as well at some point, but I think just going back to the nitty-gritty of logic as well, Stoicism can offer a lot to all of us, but especially young people.
Yeah, that's really well said, Brittany. And of course, it is one of Epictetus's constant messages, isn't it? They got to learn. People have to learn how to reason, and then they have to apply that reason in their lives. And they have to appreciate something we're really learning the importance of now: the importance of facts, of truth.
Exactly.
We took it for granted that was going to be obviously recognized and important. But oh dear, oh no, it's not. It's not. So we have to, that's another very important message that Stoicism can help us to bring across. What matter is the truth, so correct reasoning, and also finding things out and finding out what is and is not true. So I think, maybe the next book, I'm not sure it's going to be mine, but would be something on proper Stoic reasoning. I think that would be a really good book.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask that. I was like, that's the next book coming up, Stoic logic and basics.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've never been all that good at logic, but maybe, anyway, we could try and work something out, maybe. Maybe start small and a pocket-sized book. And
Stoic logic for dummies.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's
good.
Right.
Yeah, we'll speak it into existence. That'll be the next book. But this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, you guys. I have a binder here full of notes that I can't wait to go over. So thank you both so much for spending the time here with us today and to educate us on your new book and about you guys individually. Anything else where you want to kind of mention at the end here, where people can find you, where they can buy the book, things like that?
You can buy the book pretty much anywhere. It's on Amazon. It's also on the publisher's website, Routledge, and I think it's at other online bookshops as well. You might, at this point, I would recommend avoiding the Kindle edition or the ebook. There are some technical issues with that. So unfortunately, I can't recommend the electronic, but the paperback is in good shape. So you're good to buy the paperback for right now. And I guess we should also mention Stoic Week and Stoicon coming up soon. So this is the season of Stoicism in the fall, and we have Stoicon coming up on October 19th. There's a great program about Stoics in the Cosmopolis, and then Stoic Week is a little bit after that. So, of course, everyone has a chance to live like a Stoic, and the best part about that is the community. So you can, write comments and read what other people are experiencing. So that always helps when you can come together with like-minded people who are going through the same thing and just kind of, feel like you're not alone. And this is hard for everyone. So I would definitely recommend taking part in those.
I agree. Yes, I endorse that. I'd also say if anyone happens to be in Oxford, United Kingdom, on November the 16th, the Aurelius Foundation is doing a day on Stoicism there with a lot of really interesting talks. And one of the things it's profiling is the work of the Aurelius Foundation is doing with prisons, which is really important work. And you may not know, but prisons are a big topic at the moment in Britain for various reasons. So we're really pleased that we're developing Stoic courses for prisoners and for people working in prisons, and they're already in operation in 6 prisons in Britain, and we're hoping to roll it out across the whole system. So that's a really promising development. But we'll be talking about lots of things. So Oxford, November 16th, if you can find your way there, if you're within striking distance as well. And then the very valuable online courses too, Stoicon and Stoic Week.
All right. Well, that's excellent. No, that definitely gives us a lot of options. So we'll definitely check that out. And I think that prison stuff that you're talking about in the UK is extremely interesting. I'm definitely going to look into that. But thank you both so much for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time with us. And so, yeah, remember, if the book Stoic Ethics, The Basics is out. You can find it on Amazon and wherever you purchase books. And also don't forget about Stoic Week and Stoic Con here coming up in a few weeks. But we'll put all the links to these things in the show notes so that you guys have that. But appreciate you guys, and hope you have a wonderful day.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lovely conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Via Stoica podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and leaving a review. Your feedback will help us reach more like-minded people on the journey to self-improvement. If you want to get in touch with us or find more information, you can go to viastoica.com, your one-stop platform for all things Stoicism and living better. And remember, virtue is the only good.